Hi all YouTube, ACDodd here again, and welcome to another episode of On the Road Tuning with me, ACDodd, and I've got yet another deep dive for you. This time it's on fueling. Let's get stuck in. Okay, so next car, we have a Mini Sprite. This one is a Tahiti. Again, very nice inside. Let's have a look under the bonnet. This one's a runner, as you can hear. It's cold at the moment, so I'm just allowing it to warm up before I do any work. So what I'm going to do now is have a quick word with the owner and see what's wrong with it. And then we'll see what we can do to make it run as best it can. Okay, just a little bit of background on the car. The owner's had the car for over 20 years, so he's known the car a long time. It's done a lot of miles, so it's got it's just over 100,000 miles on the car. So again, in this case, the carburetor is quite worn, and so is the engine. But the job here is to give you an idea of what I come out to, show you a typical fueling profile, and then you can see how a typical one is when I get to it, and then obviously how we leave it once we're finished. Now in this particular case, I'm showing you this, and this isn't an example where I get it absolutely perfect, and that's because it's worn and it was very difficult for me to get it absolutely perfect. So in the end I had to leave this one as best as I could get it. So in the end what we've done here is we've agreed that the owner's going to have a new carburetor built for it at some point later in either this year or next year, and then I'll get a chance to go back and make that new carburetor fuel hopefully better than the one that we've that you see in this video. Anyway, without further ado, let's crack on. Okay, so some people ask me what what sort of fueling you get on a car. So okay, this one I've just started up, it's nearly fully warmed up, so let's go and have a look to see how it's running on the fueling. As you can see, that's very, very rich. So that's how I turned up to the car. That's how it's running. That's actually illegal for an MOT in the UK. So again, one of the reasons why I've been called out is in this case to get the car running clean and make sure it runs well. Now, you listen, sounds like it's running perfectly, doesn't it? And that's exactly why you can't tell how it's running by the way it sounds. Okay, so as we can see there, it's idling quite rich, and that had come from a tuner, and they'd set it like that. And again, this is a classic situation that I see. Cars have been tuned, and not much tuning's happened other than turning the mixer screw up. And unfortunately, that's the same issue that we get on the previous deep dive, where we end up with bore washing happening at idle and part throttle settings. So why have they done that? Well, let's roll the video and then we'll see what profile is being delivered by the needle. So what we're going to do now is, if you look at the RPM on the right hand side, we'll take it up to 2000 revs. You'll see that the fueling is actually good at that point. 3000. That's now too lean. 4000, too lean. And it won't even get to 5000 because it just runs out of fuel. So this is a classic case of where somebody set the mixture richer, trying to make it run better. Okay, so what we're going to do now is adjust that mixture at idle to be correct for the engine, and we'll see what effect that has on the fueling when we rev it again. Okay, so if we come over to the whiteboard again and we draw another graph so we can understand what's going on with the fueling. So this time we have a graph and we have RPM on the bottom, and we have lambda up the side. So if this is lambda 1 and this lean and this is rich. So if we add on to our graph bore wash line, we see that our fueling, when it's idling, starts about here. So we're already bore washing. And then as we go along, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 RPM. The way that engine was running, the way it's been tuned, is like this. At 2,000 we are about there, okay, 0.96, something like that, which is good. Then at 3,000 we are about here, and at 4,000 we're about here, and we didn't even get to 5 because it would have been, you know, really lean, just run out of fuel. All right, so our fueling curve does that. Okay, now this is simplified because this is only part throttle, but it basically determines the shape of the needle in the carburetor. So the important thing to understand here is this is how it was left by the tuner. Okay, bearing in mind lambda's in the middle. Okay, so at any point above 2,000 revs it was too lean. Okay, now if I had another point on that graph, and we'll call this the limit of lean misfire. So, okay, so what you can see is that with that ignition system, very difficult to ignite that, and in reality that blue line represents a high power ignition. This car wasn't fitted with a high power ignition, so in reality our lean limit is probably around that line. Okay, so if you look at that, virtually right the way across the rev range you're into misfire territory. Okay, so that's how that engine's been left by the tuner, and that's what they call tuned. Okay, so now what I've got is the mixture adjusted, and it's just a touch on the lean side, so I'll just give it a little tweak. So it stabilises. It's probably about there. So let's repeat the revs again and see what it does this time. You'll see now it's too lean at 2,000, and it's much too lean everywhere else. I'm not even going to try any higher than that because you can see the difference. So when you get the fueling like this, it's a classic case, it's just the wrong needle. So we're going to reprofile the needle in this one, and we'll make that a lot better. Okay, so what I did there after that one, if we come back to our graph, is I actually leaned out the idle point. So let's plot that on the graph and see what that looks like. So we put that to about here, okay? And then what happened to the rest of the graph? Well, I can tell you what happened to the rest of the graph, because effectively it did this. 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, and I'm predicting the 5,000. But the point is, that's what happens when you move the screw, okay? So this end, not so much, but everything else becomes even leaner. So if you now look at the setting, that would drive even worse, because we've now got no fuel from pretty much maybe 1,700 revs all the way up, okay? So that's the important thing, is this engine will drive terribly, and that needle was what was left in by the tuner. So what we're now going to do is we're now going to tune that engine by changing the needle and adjusting the carburetor, and then I'll plot that on the graph so you can see the difference. Okay, so we finished modifying the needle. I just want to show you that. That's a correctly modified needle. There's no flats filed in it. It's all nice and polished and smooth, and that's exactly how a custom needle should be. If you see your cars and you've got great big file marks and Christ knows what else in your needle, then you know you're going to have problems. Okay, so I've got the engine dialed in, got that needle done. Let's now have a check of the needle across the rev range. So 2,000, beautiful. 3,000, beautiful. A little bit rich. And a tiny bit lean. So sometimes when you're doing these carburetors, it's impossible to get the fueling absolutely perfect everywhere. So we're just on the fringes of starting to go a little bit rich at 4,000, but we're back right at 5,000. So I'm going to leave it there for this tune. And when we snap the throttle open, you can see the fueling doesn't back out, and it stays there for full power running. So I'm going to send the owner out in it now, and I think they'll be very happy with it. Okay, so what does our corrected fueling look like? So we've made the needle. So I used, I think I used an AAF needle. So if we replot what that actually looks like, I'll put it in red, actually. I know we've got a red line at the top there, but ignore that, but let's put it in red. So at idle, we're about here. Excellent, which is just under the lambda limit, so just where it idles nicely. And then at 2,000 revs, we're about the same. And then at 3,000 revs, we're about the same. And then at 4,000 revs, we start to go a little bit rich. And then at 5,000 revs, we're actually back just about on the lambda line. So if I draw that over, you can now see how the fueling has been corrected. And the important thing to understand is there's the lean misfire, or on this car, it's that line, which is around the lambda point, okay? So all this, as it previously was, meant the engine drove terribly because you was effectively in the misfire zone. The reason why the cars go so well once I've tuned them, and any of the people that have been trained by me have tuned the cars, is because the fueling at any part throttle point is always in the band where it can be ignited, combusted efficiently, and to produce power. Now, you might be wondering, what's this all about? Well, I'll give you a tip. Firstly, the carburetor was warm. Warm carburetors can be very, very sensitive. So where I was concentrating on this point to try and get enough fuel because it was lean, it was very, very close to this point on the needle, and consequently I polished a little bit too much off there, which caused that to richen at that point a bit more than I would have really liked, in order to get that so that the engine ran nicely all the way over the rev range. Now, normally when you do modified needles, if you're running an engine with a worn carburetor, you can get some funny anomalies happening, especially higher up the rev range. So this is kind of a function of the wear in the carburetor, and I'm human, so I'm not perfect. But the point is, you can now see why that engine is going to run properly, and why the original tuner didn't do that is because they didn't know how to. And the important thing to understand is, when the car is idling, it passes emission limits. When it's driving, it's always in its efficient zone, and the engine runs really well. And that's why you see when people are driving the cars after I've tuned them, they're always giving you great feedback, because the engine's pulling and driving very well. Now, obviously, that graph doesn't take into account progression, it doesn't take into account snap throttle, and it doesn't take into account full throttle. But in terms of understanding, for the purposes of the video, this was the main issue with that engine. Okay, I'll just put in a new piece of footage here just in this this video. I managed to get some footage of a tune I did just a couple of days after that one, and this one's a good example of how to get the part throttle fueling absolutely, well, virtually perfect right the way across the rev range. So that's why I've included it, because I want people to understand how good it's possible to get the fueling with an SU carburetor. Yeah, it does take some time and practice, but that's not the point right now. It's more of a case of demonstrating what's possible. Anyway, just see this next little bit of footage before we round up the video. Okay, so here's an example of a custom-made needle at part throttle. So we're going to go right the way across the rev range and just watch the fueling curve. And in particular, how good this is. So this is an HS4 carburetor on a 998. It's got an SW5 cam, ported cylinder head, and runs a 3 ohm coil. (2,000 revs). (3,000 revs). (4,000 revs). (5,000 revs). So if you're setting up an A-series or any car for a road engine with an SU carb, that's what you want to aim for, to get a good economical and a nice driving road car. Okay, so hopefully you found that useful. A little deep dive there on fueling. So people have been asking me about, you know, showing typical fueling curves and things like that. So I got the opportunity to come and see that car, and it was the perfect car to do a typical fueling curve on that I come out to, because a tuner had done it and they hadn't done nothing to the needle at part throttle, which basically makes it drive terribly. So it was a good opportunity to show you what that looks like on a graph, so you can understand it a bit more, and obviously you can see the effect of my corrections. Now, it is worth mentioning that that was a worn carb, so yeah, it did took me a little while to get that one to run right, but that's what happens when you got worn carburetors. So in this particular case, there were 2 vehicles on the day, and both vehicles I recommended carburetors changed, and therefore we could do a better fueling curve. But in terms of how the vehicle drove, the owner was astounded, so he was very, very happy with the performance. So he might even comment on this video once it's up. But the main thing to really get the message over to others is, you know, SUs are not straightforward for a lot of people, and that includes some professionals. Anyway, so as again, hopefully you found that useful. Please like, subscribe and share, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon on another deep dive. Thank you very much.